If you've been here with us over the past few months, you know that we've been working through the story of one of the most dysfunctional families in all of human history or recorded history, and yet a family that's right at the heart of God, right at the heart of the biblical narrative, and a family that we would see bringing Jesus into the world eventually. So essentially, when you look at the Old Testament, you're looking at the story of this family as God reveals them, and the story of this family as they birth a nation and a people and a Savior eventually. And so this is what we're talking about, and we're talking specifically these past 3 weeks about a man named Joseph. And Joseph, as we've learned, was favored by his father, and his brothers were jealous. And the brothers almost kill him before staging his death and then selling him into slavery, but not before beating him and throwing him into a well. And then, of course, Joseph ends up in Egypt, and he's sold to a man named Potiphar, also known as Ted, and he's part of the government in Egypt. And Joseph manages the household of Potiphar, and he's wildly successful. Everything that Joseph touches turns to gold, and everything's going great until Potiphar's wife accuses him of assaulting her. And who are they going to believe? Of course, they believe Potiphar's wife, even though it's not true. And they throw him in prison. But once again, Joseph is wildly successful in prison, and everything he's doing is going well. And he interprets the dreams of these two men. And eventually, he interprets a dream of Pharaoh. And Pharaoh is very impressed. Pharaoh's very impressed with Joseph's leadership ability and his wisdom and his ability to connect with God. And so what Pharaoh does is he elevates Joseph into this position where he is essentially managing the government in Egypt to help it prevent the effects of this famine that they're expecting. And once again, Joseph is wildly successful. He's a star. He is important. He has a wife, and he's got some kids, and he rides around in a chariot all day. I don't know. I feel like a chariot is probably like a Bentley. I don't know. It was probably pretty great to have, and he was very well esteemed, and he was doing great. Great story, all right? But we understand, as we talked about last week, that this story really isn't about ambition and dreams, as we sometimes like to preach it. It's more of a story about our playing a role in God moving the story forward. All right? God using us in his grand plan to restore humanity. And Joseph takes a role in this. Now, as we're reading this, we see that Joseph does all the right stuff. He remains perseverant and faithful and available. And he's in a position to move the story forward, as we've said. And he's in a position to save Egypt and, of course, his family from famine. And this would be a really good time to end the story, right? If we ended the story here, close Genesis out, move on to the next book of the Bible, and we could see, hey, God's working, God's provision is great, the end. But it's not the end. That's not the end. It seems as though there's something else God wants to teach us in this story. Of course, God is the author of scriptures, the Bible, and he wants to teach us more. He's not done revealing himself to us through this story. And again, we've already learned about God's provision and blessing and all the really critical stuff that we've learned in this series, but there's something more for us to learn. Because those brothers who started this mess, those brothers who are living in Canaan, well, they're enduring a famine. And if there's no grain at home, where are you going to go for grain? You're going to go to Egypt. And so these brothers, these dysfunctional brothers who started all this trouble, they head to Egypt. And you know, sometimes God works in irony. Sometimes he works in tension. And we are right about to be in the center of a whole lot of irony and tension. In Genesis 42, verse 6, it says, "Now Joseph was the governor of the land, the person who sold grain to all its people. So when Joseph's brothers arrived, they bowed down to him with their faces on the ground. And as soon as Joseph saw his brothers, he recognized them." He pretended to be a stranger. He recognizes these brothers. Have you ever been in the grocery store and you see someone who you got an argument with or something, or there's some tension, or they don't like you? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, what do you do? Do you say something? Do you hide your face? What do you do? I like to lean right into it because I get nervous. Like, what do I do? I'm like, hey! This happened to me this summer. I went into the grocery store and I saw a person who does not like me one bit, and I was like, hi! They hid their face. But what if you're in the grocery store and they're there too, and you say hi one time, but then you keep seeing them in the aisle? Then what do you do? Do you go in the other aisle? I just keep saying hi. I'm like, hey! Oh, I like Toasty Oats too. Toasty Oats. I made that up. I feel like Aldi probably sells that though. It's gotta be. So Joseph, he's feeling this awkwardness. But you know what? I bet you he's feeling more, maybe angry, emotional. I mean, all the stuff that happened to him, you don't just forget about that, right? I mean, he's had years to sort of stew about that, think about what he would say, think about the whole process of what happened to him. So all this stuff, this baggage is suddenly bubbling up to the surface. Now, they don't recognize him. I mean, they wouldn't. They think he's dead. I think he's off somewhere serving as someone's slave somewhere. But all these brothers are present. Now, the youngest one isn't present. The youngest brother, Benjamin's not present. But all these men who were responsible for disrobing him and humiliating him and throwing him into this cistern and then selling him off to go to be a slave in Egypt, they're all there, right? Can you imagine that? Seeing those men who did that to you? Now, what Joseph does, this is interesting as you read this, he immediately begins to interrogate them, sort of hassle them, right? And you're not really sure what his motive is. He's as I've said before, Joseph is sort of an emotional guy, right? We see this in a couple times. And he's probably just feeling it, and maybe he's feeling tense and isn't quite sure what he's going to do. But he starts just hassling them, and he's asking them questions about their family. He wants to find out what's going on at home, right? Where's your other brother? And where's your dad? And who else you got? He's trying to figure out what's going on. And I think as you're reading this, if this goes on for 3 chapters, that this sort of haggling or hassling, and there's almost like Joseph is putting these brothers through a test. He sort of wants to see, are they still the same guys who sold me? Are they still the same guys who did all this to me? Are they still the same people? He wants to find out what these guys are all about, and this is what we see as we go through these 3 chapters. He arrests one of the brothers, and he accuses them of being spies, and he demands they return to their family and bring back the younger brother, because I want to see who he is, because I think you're spies. You have to prove it. And then he hides silver in their grain sacks, and we see this going on. 3 chapters we see this. I think he's doing this to test their integrity. He wants to see if they're the same people that they were before. And there comes this time where all this sort of comes to a head, where these brothers have returned to Egypt again. This time they've brought their young brother Benjamin with them. And as they're about to leave, Joseph tells his servants to put a silver cup in Benjamin's bag. And it's a setup. This is on purpose. And so, obviously, Joseph finds this cup. Their servants find this cup. And Joseph says, hey, your young brother Benjamin is a thief. He's going to stay here and be my servant. Now, this is a setup. He does this on purpose. He wants to see how they respond. He wants to see if these brothers are still the same men who sold him into slavery. And what happens is, Judah, one of the brothers, and you remember Judah. Judah is one of the men who threw him in that well. It was Judah's idea to sell Joseph. Judah starts pleading with Joseph. He says, please, again, Judah doesn't know that this is his brother. He thinks he's some official in Egypt. He starts pleading with him saying, look, there must be some mistake. Don't take my little brother because my father, he already lost a son. He lost his son Joseph, and he couldn't stand it if this one died too. Please don't take my brother. Take me instead. Now, Judah isn't necessarily remembered by Joseph as a great guy. He's remembered by Joseph. And remember, Joseph has all these visions in his mind. As he sees these brothers, you're the one who took my robe off. You're the one who threw me in the well. It was the two of you. It was the three of you who kicked me. It was the two of you that punched me. And all this stuff is going through his mind. And now he sees Judah appealing and advocating for his little brother. And it seems as though this is what Joseph wanted to see. Because when this happens, he starts to lose it. All that pent-up anger and frustration and the grieving and the anguish, he just loses it. Then Joseph could no longer control himself before all his attendants. And he cried out, have everyone else leave my presence. And so there was no one with Joseph when he made himself known to his brothers. And he wept so loudly, he grieved so intensely, that everyone in the court, all the Egyptians heard what was going on. And they wondered, what's going on with Joseph? He let out all the feels, loudly. Years of pent-up anger, frustration, hurt. Lets it out. And you can say he made a scene. He made a scene. And his brothers are probably wondering, all right, like what's going on here? Why is this man acting this way? And what's going to happen to us? Because this man is like, he's been giving us a hard time. He's going to take our little brother. Are we going to go home? What's going to happen? And then Joseph says to his brothers, I am Joseph. I am Joseph. Is my father still living? But his brothers, hearing this, were not able to answer him because they were terrified at his presence. So you'd think that they were already freaked out enough, right? They're nervous, they're concerned, they don't know what's going to happen. But this is even worse because the man that they're now understanding is in front of them was that brother they tried to kill, they sold, they brutalized. That's the man in front of them. So they are rightly terrified. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when they had done so, think about this hug, right? This embrace. I am your brother Joseph, the one you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or be angry with yourselves for selling me, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. These are powerful. They are. And I want to talk about these. I'm going to go to verse 5 first. I'm going to work backwards. Because I think that he has a really good way of reframing this. He's saying to his brothers, don't be upset with yourself for your role in betraying me. Don't be upset with yourself for your role in victimizing me or hurting me. God did this to move the story forward. God did this. Remember, when we read the scriptures, I said this last week, every single page is about Jesus. It's all looking forward to Jesus. It's all foreshadowing, setting the stage, describing, unveiling. It's all about Jesus. And so what Joseph is doing is moving the story forward. He doesn't know specifically how. He just knows that God put him in this space to do his job, which was move the story forward. So Joseph is saying, I had to come here. Otherwise, all of us would have died from famine. You didn't put me in the well. The will of God put me in the well. I mean, God doesn't do evil, so you put me in the well, but God doesn't waste anything, so he used it. Understand? Mm-hmm. He doesn't waste anything. And then, amazingly, he sort of like summarizes this in the most understated way ever. He just says, God sent me ahead of you. All that mess that we just went through, it's not that big of a deal. God just gave me a little bit of a head start getting to Egypt. He knew you were coming too. I just had to come first. I had some stuff to do. Now, if this isn't the most emotionally healthy response to big-time hurt and conflict and harm that the world has ever seen, I don't know what is. I mean, he reframes that life story of his. Like, how much money do you think he spent on therapy? A lot. And yet, he reframes it and just says, hey, God brought me here because I had something to do. And I did it. And here we are. Do you know how he was able to do that? I want to back up to verse 4 now. Then Joseph said to his brothers, come close to me. And when he had done so, he said, I am your brother, the one you sold into Egypt. Have you heard of the word grace before? Of course you have. You go to altar church, we talk about grace all the time. It's really important. And then maybe you're like, oh my gosh, is he talking about grace again? And I'll remind you, I haven't preached on grace in 6 weeks. But I'll tell you, it's pretty important. And we can't read this passage without grace bleeding all over the text. It's everywhere. It's this idea that we receive something that we don't deserve, this gift of love, forgiveness, restoration, and freedom that we cannot earn. It is supernatural, and it cannot be done without the help and the influence of God. Cannot be done. Grace is impossible apart from God. Impossible. Impossible. And when we read the Bible, we see it primarily coming from Jesus extravagantly over and over and over and over again. When you sit down and you read the Gospels, when you read the New Testament and you see Jesus's response and countenance and behavior towards the outcast, the sinner, the irreconcilable, the unloved, and you really read it, there's only one thing you can do, and it's just say, wow. But you also see it here. And I think here from Joseph, more intensely than anywhere outside the New Testament. It's just so incredible. And the heart of grace that we see in this man allows him to forget Forgive. He doesn't forget, but he forgives. He forgives these men. He embraces them and even reminds them. It's not just a hug. It's not just a physical embrace. It's a restoring of relational intimacy. I'm your brother. Come here. Come to me. I'm your brother. Come close to me. I'm your brother. It reminds me of Jesus' first encounter with the disciples after he's risen again from the dead. Remember, Jesus had these really good friends until they weren't, right? One sells him out, and one hangs around, John. And John really liked to talk about that. If you read John, Jesus was with the disciple that he loved, and that was him. Like, he'd like to flex on everybody. He's like, hey, I snuck around. The rest of them, not so much. They took off. They ran away. And then when Jesus encounters them, after his resurrection, what does he say? Peace be with you. Hey, it's me, guys. Peace be with you. That's grace. That's what it looks like. It's Jesus loving his brothers in spite of the fact that they hurt him, betrayed him, offended him, and rejected him. It's Joseph welcoming and embracing all 11 of his brothers. And again, if we went through the list, undoubtedly Joseph knew and remembered specifically what each brother did. If you've ever been harmed or abused, you know details that you want to forget, but you know them. You know who did it, how it was done, and that's something you can't shake. And Joseph knew that as he saw them. And he didn't say, Reuben, you come on, because Reuben, you were pretty cool. You tried to save my life. The rest of you losers, you're going to jail. No, come to me. I'm your brother. Come close to me. I'm your brother. That's a tricky thing about grace. It asks us to do things that seem really uncomfortable. Because essentially what we're doing is giving something to people, forgiveness, love, etc., restoration. We're giving something to people when we really don't want to. Because there's a sense that we lose something, right? You ever been in an argument before and like you just refuse to apologize even though you're wrong, and the reason you don't apologize is because you feel like you're going to lose something, you're going to lose your position, you're going to lose the sense that like I'm giving in to you. Like, we all know that you feel like less than when you say I'm sorry. That's why no one does it. There's a risk. There's a risk that somebody can use it against you. There's a risk that it can make you feel it can hurt your confidence. We just don't like it. We like grace when we receive it. Like, that's what we sing about in church, right? We love singing about what God has done for me because I know what I was and I know who I am in him, and I celebrate that. We should celebrate that. That's worth celebrating. But we don't often sing about the grace that we should give to others. Like, most people aren't leaving church with a whole list of people they need to give grace to. Like, it just doesn't happen. Because that doesn't sound like it's fun. It sounds like yard work or worse. It sounds like drywalling, or it sounds like waking up at 3 a.m. to go to work. Like, giving grace is not something that's exciting. Now, part of that is because it's really, really hard. And there's no judgment here. I'm talking about me, right? Giving grace is hard. Do you think you might have a list of people who, like, you're kind of just a little fed up with, a little irritated with? Like, there's something there, right? And maybe you do. And maybe it's coming to mind right now. It's just hard. But the other part of it, and I think this has probably gotten worse over the last few years, and this is something that we all do. I think that we intentionally, or maybe unintentionally, position ourselves away from people who are different than us. I think we intentionally position ourselves away from people who make us feel uncomfortable or have ideas or beliefs that we don't necessarily agree with. I think that we position ourselves away from people who have different worldviews than us or different philosophies on life. And I think unintentionally or not, we've insulated ourselves from people who invade our comfort. So really, the only people we would choose to spend time with are people who are really just like we are. Do you know what happens when we do this? We rob ourselves from understanding this gift of grace that God has given us. Here's why. Because when we only spend time with the people who are like us and who agree with us and who make us feel good and who don't make us feel thoughts of confusion or frustration, we don't have to sort through conflict and all the messiness and uncertainty and pride and frustration and hurt and irritability and all the bitter and uncomfortable, heartbreaking stuff that Joseph went through. Like, think about all the stuff that he had to deal with. Sort through, pray through, meditate through, and now it's right in front of his face. I said God does that, right? But it's in facing all those feelings where we make a choice to love other people. You see, when the Bible talks about the love of God, they use this word agape. You've heard this before. And agape love is a love of will. It's a love of choice. I'm deciding to love you. And some people will say it's like the love that a parent has for a child. No, it's more than that. It's more. Because I love my child because they're mine. Agape love is a love of choice. It's not a love of affinity. It's not a love of value. I will love you in spite of the fact that you're ugly and have body odor and have stolen from me and broken into my house. And I'm just choosing to love you. Independently of anything that you do, right? And so when we have to face all this emotion and this stuff because we're choosing to push through our disagreement, that's when agape love forms. And that's where grace is born out of. So if we avoid those things, you know what we never have? Grace or agape love. Mm-hmm. But when we make a choice, when we make a commitment to push through, that's when we get the grace thing right. And that's what Joseph did. Mm-hmm. That's what Jesus did. Think about this idea that Jesus in heaven or in eternity past said, hey, all of these people on earth, they hate me. They would reject me because what I'm trying to show them is radical and different, and they will kill me. But here's the thing. I'm going to come to earth anyways. Show them who I am. Show them a new way. Because I love them. I've chosen to do that. How secure is he, right? How confident is he? How convinced is he that it's worth it? That's what love is. That's what grace is. And we have to battle through it. It's not a passive thing. Look, love is not passive. Grace is not passive. Sometimes our response to conflict or our response to discomfort is to avoid it or to insulate ourselves from it. I mean, if you think about Joseph, he could have very easily said, those are my brothers. I don't like them, but this is too much for me to deal with. I'm just going to shoot some hoops, ignore these people. He could have been like, hey, for me, grace is not arresting them. Grace is letting them live. Grace is ignoring them. But that's not grace. That's avoidance. Grace is for others, avoidance is for us. And avoidance may keep you safe. It may keep you feeling secure. Avoidance may reduce the anxiety in your life. Avoidance may keep you away from sticky feelings that you don't want to feel. But it's not going to help you grow. Only grace does that. Grace is something that we have to fight for, and we have to fight through. It's going to feel painful and agonizing. It will. Grace is so hard. But when we fight through it, it fixes everything. It fixes everything. If you look at the world and all the messed up, broken, dysfunctional parts of the world, if it's in your brain right now and you're thinking it, grace will fix it. How do we fix this? Grace. Every time. Everything you can imagine, it's always going to be grace. Because grace is followed by love. But if we, sons and daughters of God, children of light, if we don't stand up and commit to the fight, who will? If we avoid giving grace because it makes us feel the feels and the emotion and the difficulty, and it takes us back, and it makes us feel uncertain, and it rocks us to the core, and we've been empowered by the Holy Spirit, who's going to show grace? Who's going to do it if not us? That's our job. And it fixes and it restores. There are two men in our church. And during the past few years, they were having like this really difficult time getting along on social media. And that describes a lot of us, but this is like really something else. A little bit different. And I spoke to both of them. I'm like, hey, no one's perfect here. We all get a little riled up. But that person that you're talking about, it's your brother. In Christ, that's your brother. That didn't seem like it really made a difference. You know how we get. And you know what happened last week? Right out there. We're all having our chili. Randy's like, vote number 6. And while that was going on, this one man walks up to the other man and he says, hey, I'm really sorry. And the other guy, he said, I'm sorry too. And they hugged each other. And they started talking like old pals. Yeah. That was pretty cool. That only happens in the church. It doesn't happen anywhere else. Because Jesus has given us this divine gift of grace that teaches us to lay down our pride. And when we lay down our pride, something better happens. Humility, being spirit-filled, and then love. And that's what happened. And I didn't see this. This was unprompted. I didn't see this happen. I didn't even know about it until the next day. And then the next day, something else pretty cool happened. Maybe even more encouraging. I don't know. I had this church meeting. Anybody ever been to a church meeting? I don't know whether to say you're lucky or not. I mean, they can be great. They can be terrible. I've led both. We're talking about these things that we want to do. You know, I just feel like, we just feel like people want to be connected and share commonality about things that are important to them. And so we were talking about doing that and connecting people and making a way for people to just do good things and things that they love and things that make them feel good and things that serve the gospel. And we had this meeting, and it was so cool. And as I'm sitting here, in this meeting, two things that came to my mind. The first was that it seems like, to me, there is this sort of like awakening that is happening in people as I talk to people, have conversations with people. Like there's this sense of like, oh yeah, I really love Jesus. And I really love the church, and I love my community, and I really want to do the things that I used to do and really be more obedient to Jesus in the way that I'm living. There's this sort of like awakening from this slumber that I'm seeing, and it's really encouraging. And I was feeling this to start, and then as we're making sort of plans and enjoying each other's company, we're laughing and picking on each other in that way that only friends can do. You know that you got some friends? Got some friends? Mm-hmm. One or two, yeah? And you joke, right? And you can tease each other in a way that no one else can tease, right? You kind of needle each other, right? And we were doing this needling thing, and it was about like all the sort of things that you aren't really allowed to talk about, like the taboo stuff that no one wants to talk about, even less make jokes about, because no one can do it without really making other people angry because we're just so chafed and just, But this is happening in this meeting, and it was respectful, but funny. I mean, like, hilarious. And we were having fun like just old friends do, right? And this thought came over me that I'm sitting in this room of people, I don't know, 13, 14 people, I don't know. And every person in that room had a different background, different opinion, belief about politics or society or life. I mean, this room was diverse and divided in every way. And yet, we're all teasing each other and having fun about the things that make us different. And it's not that the people in that room didn't see the differences as important. They just cared about each other more than they cared about their differences. And most importantly, they cared more about the gospel and our role in restoring the world in Jesus' name than they did about all the divisive things in the world that have a tendency to tear people apart. And I'm going to tell you, and maybe you don't think this is a big deal, and what I'm describing doesn't seem that important to you, but I've been a Christian for 20 years, and I've never experienced anything like that in my life. Because groups of people always stay with the same group of people. And if you think about the church, how the church operates, the church is generally, and this just is worldwide, is filled with all of the same kinds of people. So much so that the outsider or the outcast only feels like they're allowed in if they adapt their behavior, right? So you have this group over here, and then this group over here, and there's segregation that happens because no one feels like they can be together. And when diverse groups of people do get together, if it's not policed, if there's not very strict guidelines and rules, what people do is they get judgmental and angry, and they start bickering and start yelling, and it becomes a school board meeting. Mm-hmm. This is what people do. I've never seen in my life a group of people who were so secure in themselves, so secure in Jesus and their calling, that they could laugh at the differences that the world would call irreconcilable. And it was funny, and it was fun, and it was encouraging. And it happened because the people in that room knew what really mattered was restoring hearts and communities in the name of Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. You know how we got there? Learning grace together. Yeah. Sometimes you think you know about grace when everyone has the same values and ideas about how life should work. Like you think you know about grace, like, oh, I've forgiven my husband, or I've forgiven my children, or, I've gotten over this, or gotten over that. And Jesus is like, hey, you do that. Even the godless pagans do that. I say instead, love your enemy. That's what Jesus said. But I don't think that we really know about grace until you've seen someone that you really care about on the opposite end of an idea or a belief, right? Like, you're like, I love this person, but they are on a totally different island than me when it comes to this issue. And then you start to face this paradox of like, what do I do? What do I do with this? You don't really know about grace until you see your brothers and sisters in front of you. Or rather, your brothers who sold you into slavery. You have to come to terms with the paradox of loving someone a whole bunch and also disagreeing with them or being troubled or confused. But if you let it, and this is a choice, if you let it, love will draw you in. Love has this allure to it. Like, we want to push it away because we don't like it because it asks us to do really, like, difficult stuff. But if you let it, there's this allure that it has because we start to see why it works. And as it draws you in, it'll begin to change you. And it'll begin to change the way you see other people. And if you can stay in it, and this is the tough part, there's always this aspect of endurance to love. Remember I said agape love was a choice of the will. It's a choice where you say, I will do this and never stop doing this. There's an endurance that comes with love. And it takes work because you have to commit to self-sacrifice. It means love during parties and picnics and celebrations, but also during pandemics and elections and seasons of grieving and loss and frustration. And if you can't endure, love matures into humility, and you start to see each other through the eyes of Christ. And what this means is our saying to other people, you are so important to me, your heart and your story and your growth and your vitality as a human being, that I can put your needs before mine because in your joy, I am joyful. That only comes from the gospel. And then I stop seeing my opinion or grievance or preference as being the most important thing. People become most important. Unity becomes most important. Grace becomes most important. And then we become what Jesus was describing the night before his crucifixion. And this is such a underutilized piece of scripture. And I love it. But Jesus prays for unity. Unity, and this is what he says when he's praying. Unity that the world will know, Father, that you sent me and have loved them even as you have loved me. Imagine this. Jesus is saying to us in our unity, in our bond that is solidified in grace, people will believe that I am real and that your love is good. That is the responsibility of the people of God. Imagine that burden and that calling, and yet the understanding of so much of the time we've gotten that really wrong because we just think that we're more important than everybody else. And I do this. This is an us thing. But what I saw in that room was the clearest example of that unity that Jesus was talking about that I've ever seen in my entire life. It's true. All sorts of people, all sorts of opinions, loving each other, unified under the common good, the common purpose, the common mission of helping the world to see Jesus. You know what God showed me in that meeting? He showed me that we have something really special here. that this church has something to offer to the world that's very, very special and unique. And I think we spend so many of our conversations about grace focusing on the individual aspect of grace. And this is something that's unique to America and unique to this part of history where my relationship with Jesus is about me. So I become saved so I can tell you and you can become saved and you can tell some other person, right? It's very much focused on the individual. This is not the sense that we get from the New Testament. The purpose of grace in the New Testament is about the everyone. The community. As N.T. Wright says, and I love this, he says that grace is not God's gift to us. Grace is God's gift through us to the rest of the world. It's not about me. It's about us. It's so much more than that individual focus because together we make it attractive to the outside when we're together because we have something that they don't. Like, who doesn't want to be part of a community where every single person can love one another in spite of their differences and they don't have to feel angry or frustrated or anxious or mean or have regret or shame or guilt because of the way they treated someone? Everyone wants that. Everybody wants that. I think that it's in community where Jesus is at the center, that makes the church the most irresistible force on earth. Can I say that again? I think it's in community where Jesus is the center, that makes the church the most irresistible force on earth. And I think that we can do it. And I think it's because we've been through trial and fire and love and commitment and endurance that we figured this thing out. So all the stuff like the church shutting down and the pastor having an existential crisis and where's the kids ministry and like all this stuff is just the fire that's refined. And it's forced us into grace. And it's beautiful. And I'm so full of joy. Thank you God for that. Thank you God for the trial. Thank you God for frustration and difficulty and people that I can't get along with because I've learned to love those people and want to die for them. And I mean that. And I know you do too. And I don't know, I'm just skipping through these pages of notes because I think God's already said it. There's work to do. There's always work, right? There's always work to do. But what I know is that we have the heart of Joseph. I know that we do. And I'm not boasting in me. I'm not boasting in you. I'm boasting in Christ. And so we can say to each other and to the world, come close to me. I'm your brother. Come close to me. I am your sister. Come close to me. Let's see what we can do together.